coming your...
Hello again, everybody, and welcome to the Memphis Roundtable Wrestling Discussion. I'm your host, Scott Bowden. I know that music, the theme from 2001, I know for a lot of you, especially if you grew up here in the Carolinas, that meant one thing. That meant the arrival of Ric Flair, the World Heavyweight Champion. But for me, and a lot of Memphians growing up, that music meant one thing. Elvis Presley, but also the start of 90 minutes of the wild and wooliest, as that man used to like to say, professional wrestling action in the world. The Saturday morning wrestling show that aired live from Union Avenue and WMC TV. And with me today, appropriately enough, here on Saturday morning for 90 minutes, which was the length of the TV show then, I have the three men who made it all possible. The longtime owner of the Memphis territory, promoter Jarrett. His announcing team, Lance Russell. And Lance's longtime sidekick, Dave Brown. You know, I guess if I had grown up in Pittsburgh in the 70s, I would have wanted to be Terry Bradshaw. You know, I would have wanted to lead the Steelers down the field and maybe win a Super Bowl ring. But you see, I didn't grow up in Pittsburgh. I grew up in Memphis. So I wanted to be Jerry the King Lawler. I wanted to be Bill Superstar Dundee. I wanted to be Handsome Jimmy Valiant. I wanted to get in there and slug it out with Lumberjack Joe LeDuc. I wanted to wipe that pretty grin off the universal heartthrob Austin Idol's face. I dreamed of not of Super Bowl rings, but of NWA World title belts and AWA World title belts. It was just a staple of my childhood. And I guess the first question, you know, and it wasn't just a Memphis phenomenon. People all over the world traded tapes to see Memphis action. And I guess that's the first question. What made Memphis wrestling so special, in your opinion?
You know, when we were talking earlier, that's really a difficult question to answer.
Is the mic on?
Testing. Yeah, excuse me. We were talking earlier, and Scott asked us that question. And it's really a difficult thing to answer. From my perspective, and I said this last night at the banquet, I was an incredibly lucky guy to be surrounded by unbelievable talent. I've always felt like Jeff, my son, and I started TNA. And when I was sitting down trying to convey to him the little bit of knowledge that I had, I explained to him that the most important talent he would have on a television show are the announcers. And it's for the simple reason that if you go back, and I've done this, and take a tape, put it at an editing machine, and pull out all that doesn't have the announcer's voice or the announcer's face on camera, what you're left with is the 8 minutes of commercial time in an hour. They are literally the show. My star, Jerry Lawler, would have 6, 7, 8, 10 minutes at the most in an hour-and-a-half show. And so for all the other stars. So I credit these two gentlemen with the passion they had, the broadcastability they had, making me look like a pretty smart promoter.
He was a pretty smart promoter.
I also was very fortunate that some people that were promoters allowed me to. Eddie Graham gave up Paul Orndorff. I was down there and I said, Eddie, I need some fresh talent. He said, who do you want? And I said, I want that guy right over there. He said, well, he's just, a preliminary guy. I said, well, he is for you. And so I got Paul Orndorff, and he went on to be Mr. Wonderful. I was in Atlanta, and I got Steve Kern, and Steve became the Fabulous One. There was a kid in Memphis that was a good artist, but a lot of people thought he'd never make a wrestler because he had a nervous habit of grinning, and he liked to chew chewing gum. But we finally got him to quit grinning, and he became Jerry the King Lawler. Louis Tillett called and said, I've got a big guy that looks like $1 million, but he doesn't know how to wrestle. I said, how big is he? And he said, well, he's not quite as big as Andre, but he's bigger than anybody you've got. And he sent him up there, and it happened to be Hulk Hogan. Two kids drove in their car all the way from California. Well, there were 4 of them to start with, and I sent 2 of them home. But they drove all the way from California, and I had a big room in my house, and when they drove up and knocked on the door, I brought them in, and I said, lock up with me and tell me what level you are. And anyway, to make a long story short, they turned out to be Sting and Ultimate Warrior. I can go on and on and on. Jimmy Hart played with the Gentrys and just loved wrestling, and so he stumbled into our lives. Jimmy Cornette. What I think made Memphis wrestling is at one moment in life, some of the most incredibly talented people came together and produced what's called Memphis wrestling.
You know how it is when you get old, you go to sleep.
Oh, turn it on, please. Just learn it. What can I say to you? Let's ring the bell, Davey, and get this show underway. What do you say? Yeah, it was a great time to be there, and I think, Jerry, we were talking about it a little earlier, and Jerry hit it. And it sounds so corny, but I'm going to say it again, and that is the fact that one of the things that made the whole show different is the fact of the passion, and this is not to say that anybody in any other market or anything like that, but there was a difference in the passion for it and for the business and the way everybody loved it and approached it. We enjoyed coming to work. It wasn't a lot of fun a lot of time, but by when it was over with, the show was done. It was a good one. We come walking on the way, and we had something to talk about, too. There was a lot of passion to it, Davey.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think one thing, it was something we enjoyed doing. It wasn't something we had to do. I had a job. Lance had a job. That changed when you went to work for Jerry at a wrestling company. But we were working for the television station. We came to work on Saturday, which was our day off, because we were having fun. We enjoyed what we were doing. And we had good things to work with. I have seen wrestling shows where I don't think I would have done it for very long because it just didn't have the same undefinable spark that Memphis had. A lot of that had to do with, I think, 3 things. It had to do with history. Wrestling had always been a very successful television show in the Memphis market going back to the 50s. It was one of the first live television broadcasts on my television station, which was the first television station in Tennessee. And so it had a history. The demographics of the market were such that wrestling was a good fit. We didn't have a pro football team. We didn't have a pro basketball team. Some argue we still don't have a pro basketball team, although they claim they're fixing that.
You said it.
We, at the time, the University of Memphis Tigers, which are so huge now, they weren't that big. So this was a big professional sport. It was the big professional sport in the Memphis market. And I think another thing that made it so great, especially when Jerry, it really started its run when he was working for Nick Goulas but was booking the territory, and then when he took it over altogether, was the meticulous way the show was laid out. I have worked, and in the future, I worked with promotion that the show was sort of put together that day, or maybe a week ahead. Well, Jerry had stuff in his mind, I don't know for how long, but for weeks he knew where it was going. And I think that is one of the huge keys to not only the initial success, but the continuing success for many, many years of that show.
Dave, you mentioned the fact that Memphis Wrestling really was the pro sports franchise in Memphis. And Lawler being from Memphis and being a Memphian, in my opinion, he was my home team. That's the place that he served. But before he became the hometown hero, he was this brash, cocky upstart, this young heel who feuded with Jackie Fargo. And Jackie's was honored at the Hall of Heroes last night. Can you tell us a little bit about Jackie Fargo and what made him a special performer? And also, we talked a little bit about the personal animosity. Personal issues draw money. And really, the angle kind of booked itself, really. You had the young guy, the young rising star, and the aging star in Jackie Fargo. Can you tell us a little bit about that feud?
Well, the history of it was Jackie Fargo, for a while, was a disc jockey at a radio station in Memphis. And we call them interns today. Fargo called him his lackey. And Jerry Lawler was the intern for the radio station, and he drew some pictures of his passion, which was wrestling. And Lance Russell saw the pictures and came to me and said, I think it would be novel if we showed these kids pictures. I know it's not part of the angle, but it's exciting. And so Jackie brought Jerry Lawler and showed his artwork. And I guess that was Jerry's first exposure, wasn't it?
Yeah, Jerry, his dad, I got in touch with his dad at home, and he brought Jerry down. The reason I remember that specific thing is because Jerry, to this day, still talks about that first suit that he had when he came down on television like that. And we went back and reviewed all of the matches that had taken place at the it wasn't the Coliseum, that's what the first instinct to say. But the matches that had taken place, and Jerry told about the winner to lose, and we had the drawings which depicted exactly how Tojo did whatever he did and so on like that, and it just seemed to hit off and work well.
One thing I remember from that feud that I think may have been the key to the transition was that there had been some matches, and finally Jackie agreed to put his hair up in a match. Well, in those days, hair against hair was the ultimate. And it was a humiliating thing for anybody to lose their hair, but especially a superstar. Yeah. And that's exactly what Jackie Fargo was in those days in Memphis, Tennessee. And he lost the match. And he had his head shaved. And Lance was on vacation that next week, I remember. And Jackie came in, he was booked somewhere else, so we recorded the interview, and I recorded it with him. Jackie was so good at selling that interview that he was over with me. So, again, as Jerry said, we just had great talent, and we had a willingness with Jackie to make the program work. Jackie could have been a jerk about the whole thing and said, "I'm the star. I'm not doing this sort of thing." But he was on board with it, and that's ultimately what made it work.
Well, that program was in 1974. It was wildly successful. So many string of straight sellouts for Lawler-Fargo matches on top. And shortly thereafter, you began to build up Lawler as a legitimate contender for the NWA World Title, which also kind of reflected, it seems to me, your philosophy of how the world title matches should be promoted. You don't just book one, you build to it. And you had Lawler each week knocking off the top 10 contenders and slowly building him up as a major superstar who could contend for the world title, culminating in September 1974. A crowd of 10,000 people saw Lawler win the world title from Jack Briscoe for about 5 minutes, but of course he used a chain that was reversed. Can you tell us about the build-up for that program? I know you had help from Eddie Graham, the Sheik, Dick the Bruiser, guys like that. Can you tell us a little bit about how you put that program together?
Yes, that was a fun time in my life. The roots of it go back to when I was 14 or 15-year-old kid and sitting at the Hippodrome Arena. Lou Thez was the world heavyweight champion. Most of the wrestlers would pull up around behind the building and go in the side door and duck into the dressing room. Lou pulled up in a taxi at the front of the building. I was tearing tickets at the matches, and he would walk up those steps at the Hippodrome, walk through, and literally goosebumps would jump on my arms and the back of my neck. He had such a presence that you knew he was the champion if you'd never seen wrestling.
Speak in the microphone.
Hello, I'm sorry. Did anybody hear that?
He don't do TV much.
Can you repeat all that, Jerry?
All right. Anyway, Lou Thez was an inspiration to me, and thankfully, years and years later, we got to work together. But at any rate, I was so impressed with Lou and the world title. I had this almost reverence for the world title all of my life, and I still do. It signifies that you have achieved the very top in this profession. So when Jerry Lawler was really talented, and I knew that he deserved to be the champion. A side note, I campaigned unsuccessfully for years and years and years. But at any rate, he was a very talented, and I made up my mind that a quest for the championship was really a lifetime achievement or a lifetime effort. Well, you can't do a lifetime program, but I did one for about a year. Some funny side notes to it was that back in those days, the real superstars were not always cooperative. So I would bring in the Sheik, and I'd say, we're doing this quest for the title. Can you help us out? And he said, no. And I said, okay. So in matches, the match builds to a crescendo, and then sometime that's the end of the match, and we call it the finish, and sometimes it's just almost a finish. It looks like a finish, but we call it a false finish, and then the match continues. We would do a false finish with the cameras running, and then the Sheik would do whatever we did, and then the Sheik would go back to Detroit, and I would have Jimmy Hart would come out and say, "It's the greatest day of my life. You should have seen Jerry Lawler beat the stew out of the Sheik and pin him 1, 2, 3." And Lance and Dave would say, "Hey, come on, Jimmy," because their credibility was important. But he'd say, "Play the tape." So here's the tape with Lawler, bam, 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 beating him 1, 2, 3. And then we'd go on to next week. So Lawler being a heel, Lance and Dave keeping the credibility of saying, "Oh, come on." But yet it was effective. So Lawler effectively beat everybody in the nation in the quest for the title. If not a pin, a creative pin. And then, of course, the night of the big match, Eddie Graham and I stood at the back of the Mid-South Coliseum. And Briscoe was Eddie's man. Eddie loved him, groomed him, nurtured him. Lawler was my man. And, you know, that night was so emotional, it was like our two children were fighting for that they were, you know, really wrestling for a world title. And that's kind of it in a nutshell.
Lance, going back to that moment, I know that when I was a big fan, I monitored the ratings and the wrestling magazines and always waiting for Lawler to crack that top 10 because I knew, you know, in my mind, the world champion was going to be in Memphis soon. And I always begged my parents to take me to the matches whenever there was a world title match. And I don't know if it was just me being so young, but it seemed like to me there was like almost like this nervous energy in the air. Can you describe not only just the world title matches, but you know, whenever you had like a big sellout crowd, what was the atmosphere like at the Mid-South Coliseum?
Well, the atmosphere was charged by the fans, and the fact that they would come in with the same kind of and you couldn't help but pick up that enthusiasm from everybody that was there. Wow, tonight's the night. This is the one that we've been waiting for. Jerry's had him on the road, had Jerry Lawler on the road, heading to that title, and this could be the night. And the enthusiasm was absolutely unbelievable. I also remember the reverse side of that great enthusiasm, and it was because of the love and the interest that they had in Jerry Lawler. And this is the night where the promoter, after it was all over with, had to be sitting there looking at bills coming in. And this was when handsome Jimmy Valiant, I believe it was, nailed Lawler with the guitar. He came out, he was supposed to get in the ring with Jerry, and he was injured and hurt. And when they broke the doors down on the Coliseum, those giant doors.
It was supposed to be a hair versus hair match that night.
Tell me, I mean, the mind gets a little weak here.
No. But that was the deal. Yeah, I think he had about 9,000 people there, and I think Valiant came out on crutches and said he couldn't wrestle.
Crutches, exactly.
And nailed him with a crutch. And then later, when they did the retirement angle, that's when Valiant hit Lawler with the guitar. But we're getting ahead of ourselves like a little bit here. And around 1975. Another young star. You mentioned all these big stars who had come through Memphis, but you omitted one. This guy quickly rose through the ranks and went on to become an NWA world champion, and he was here yesterday. I'm talking about Tommy Wildfire Rich. Can I get some memories from all of you about Tommy, and especially Jerry? I know that you were very instrumental in getting him started. I believe your wife, Deborah, grew up with Tommy in Hendersonville, right?
Yes. My wife is Deborah Marlin. Eddie Marlin was a wrestler, and it was his daughter. Tommy Rich played with Deborah as kids. And so Tommy got out of high school and came and Deborah said, you know, please help him, see if he can break in and be a wrestler. So I said, well, you know, it's all attitude. And so I had him come to the farm, and I had a water pipe going to from the house to the horse barn. And so I went out there. I got up early. You know, I'm up late at night. So I got up and walked out there in my pajamas, and I said, Tommy, this is going to get you in shape. Cut the water pipe here and take it up all the way to the barn. And so I gave him a pick and a shovel. So I look out there about 3 hours later, and he's yanking on that water pipe. Tommy went through that, every imaginable thing that I could do to discourage him, and he wouldn't give up. So we started training him, and he was a good-looking kid and turned out to be a decent wrestler, and had his little run in Memphis, and then Jim Barnett, the promoter in Atlanta, wanted him, and so I went down and traded. I think I traded Steve Kern for Tommy Rich. And he went on to be right when the Superstation was booming, and he became a national star.
Dave, what about you? What are your memories of Tommy starting out?
Well, I remember the whole thing. I remember Tommy coming in with a long bleach blonde hair and the energy, and I think he put all that together with a great program. But he was kind of. It's kind of like when Stan and Steve came in as the Fabulous Ones. It was a new energy. It was kind of things that leveled off a little bit, and here comes Tommy, and he pumped it up again. And by the way, he learned from the best with getting him in shape, because Buddy Fuller ran a wrestling school once, and he had this farm. I don't remember where it was, up in Middle Tennessee, I think, and he needed some land cleared. So he took the students of his wrestling school out to get them in shape. They cleared the farm. So, he got his land cleared, and he got his kids
the Jerry
in
Jarrett
shape.
Buddy Fuller workout. Another star who came around that time, if you're talking about great stars in Memphis, you got to talk about the superstar Bill Dundee. Probably Jerry Lawler's greatest opponent. And in the summer of '77, wrestling was just a program that my dad watched. I was watching Foghorn Leghorn, and he made me switch over to Memphis Wrestling and Lance Russell, which, some might say the difference was negligible. But anyway, I had to get one jab at you, Lance, for old time's sake. But in summer of '77, the Bill Dundee-Jerry Lawler feud was just riveting television. And I was a fan. I was hooked immediately and a fan, for the next 15, 20 years until I was able to become a performer myself and work for Jerry and Jerry Lawler. Can you tell us about that feud? And again, it kind of goes back to personal issues draw money. You had two hot superstars coming up at the same time, and it was just a natural. You put them together. They actually had professional jealousy. They weren't crazy about each other outside the ring. I found that out years later when I worked with them. Can you tell us a little bit about what made that feud special?
Yeah. Bobby Shane called me one day and said, I've got two Aussies here that I think you'd like to have. And Bobby was in Australia booking. And he sent Bill Dundee and George Barnes. George was kind of a laid-back guy, and Dundee had the worst little man complex of anybody I've ever known in the business, right? And but this gave him the fire that made him the superstar. So instantly, Dundee set his sights on unseating Jerry Lawler. George went back to Australia, and Jerry recognized that Dundee was gunning for the top spot. So Jerry, being protective too, didn't care much for him. Now, they were both professional enough not to have a shoot, but, brother, they beat the stew out of each other to the point that it was so believable because it really was real. They didn't like each other, and so they wanted to see if they could make the other one quit. And it became the most classic feud that we've ever had in Memphis.
I guess, and it culminated with, of course, it boiled down to hair matches. After all the titles, Lawler putting up $5,000. I think Dundee lost his Corvette. Lawler lost his Cadillac. They won him back. Shaved Mickey Poole's head, who was Lawler's manager.
Shaved Dundee's wife's head.
Well, shaved Dundee's head, and then it culminated with actually shaving the head of Beverly Dundee. How did you get her to do that?
Well, money.
Hey, listen, that one of the interesting things that night that I don't know whether you guys remember or not, but we had this older gentleman, he's younger than I am right now, but he was a barber there, and he was always he was up there and ready to cut that hair, and it was a big highlight of his entire life. And he got up there, and here is this young lady, Beverly Dundee, and he's going over there, and he can't bring himself to take those scissors and start on that hair. Well, let me tell you what. all of you folks that paid your money to come in there and see something like this happen with her hair getting cut or otherwise, it was not going to be a situation where they said, no, she's not going to get her hair cut tonight. We can't bring ourselves to it. And the crowd, you remember how they got? They got so hot, they were ready to cut the barber's hair.
and she was the baby face. Dundee was the baby face.
Right.
They were not going to leave without a haircut.
Please save our lives, because they were getting closer all the time to the ring. Please get the hair off that girl.
They promised Beverly a haircut. They just didn't tell her how close.
Right. Okay. And the night that Lawler beat Dundee and shaved Bev's head, that was his retirement match. And of course, it was supposedly Lawler was going to concentrate on music and art. He may have made a go of it with art. I don't know about music, but anyway, it was all in anger. It was all designed to not only turn Lawler babyface, but also to create a new star. And I think, Jerry, you said one time, it's hard to create a new star when your existing star is still around. And you went and you got a guy completely different from Lawler, and his name's Handsome Jimmy Valiant, who's right over there. The boy from New York City came in and raised hell for about 4 months. And Jerry Lawler was doing a concert before the matches along with Jimmy Hart. And Jimmy Valiant, that no-good dirty dog, snuck up behind him and busted a guitar over his head and created, and off we were running with a hot new feud. It's all fresh. Lawler's back as a baby face. What are your memories of Handsome Jimmy Valiant?
1,000 of them. Yeah. And they're all good. I've told people over the years, Jimmy is one of the people that I get asked about often, and I say, well, he's a great guy, and it always amazed me that back in the dressing room, and if you've talked to Jimmy, he's just, you almost want to say, speak up, Jimmy. He's sort of quiet and mild-mannered guy. And then when he came through that door into the studio, he exploded. Whoa, handsome Jimbo from Memphis. And he used to call Lance Lancer, I remember that. And at the time, Jackson Brown was real hot on the rock and roll chart, so he would call me Jackson. I know your name is something, but I'm not sure what, and I don't care. I'm concentrating on what's going on here. Hello, Lancer. Hello, Jackson. And he'd go right into the promo. Of course, I remember the guitar. I remember the crutch. I remember the whole thing. But, again, a great talent. He wasn't there all the time. That was a great thing about Jimmy. When he would come to town, it was an event. It was sort of like when Roughhouse Fargo would come in. It was an event when he would come to Memphis. And last thing I'll say about it, I could go on forever, but one thing that I will never forget was the video. In Memphis wrestling, rock and roll videos pretty well started on our shows before MTV and VH1 and all of that sort of thing. And they did one with Jimmy in a limo to Joe Walsh's Life's Been Good. And if you go back and listen to this and imagine the video, it was one of the great moments, great recorded moments of that era, I think.
Well, he also had his own song, Son of a Gypsy.
Yeah, he did.
That Jimmy Hart,
did his own song.
Helped him write.
But that was a magical moment for me.
And listen, I want you to remember, too, that not only that, Jimmy, the one and only Handsome Jimmy, has got himself a brand new book over there that he has written every word in it, and you'll want to see it because this is the man that has got a lot of things to tell you about. So you go by and see Jimmy.
I have 1,000 memories of Jimmy. When I was going to pick up spot show money for Nick Goulas, Jimmy had just come back from New York and he was working. And of course, he's legend his box office. But here is what I remember most about Handsome Jimmy. At this time, Lawler is a partner with me. So we're talking one day, and we said, Jimmy comes in and he does great. We need to really get him to come here and stay. I said, I agree. Let me talk to him. So I sit down with Jimmy and I have a talk, and he says, I said, what will it take to get you to move here? And he said, brother, I'll need a house. And I said, oh, well, there's you can get apartments, house. He said, no, I need a house. So I go back to Lawler and I said, the son of a bitch wants us to buy him a house. and Lawler said, well, what will that cost? I said, I don't know. The payments will be $1,500 a month. And we probably have to pay $4,000 or $5,000 down. And so I go back to Jimmy and I said, well, as strange as this seems, I'm going to buy you a house. And he goes, I'll be there, brother. So we found Jimmy a house. Now, that's part of the story. The other part of the story is that Jimmy is part Aborigine. And he has wanderlust, and he likes to move off. So one day, I opened up my mailbox, and I got a set of house keys and a note that says, love you, brother, gotta go. That's what I remember about Handsome.
I think for me, I became a big fan of Handsome Jimmy. He was the first one, really, who I can recall, who made references to pop culture. And in the 80s, that kind of became the thing to do. But Handsome Jimmy, as far as I know, is the only wrestler who dated both Linda Ronstadt and Sally Field, according to him in his interviews. After the Lawler-Valiant feud ran its course, you found a new opponent for Lawler. Somebody, again, completely different from Valiant. I'm talking about Lumberjack Joe LeDuc, who, in my opinion, was one of the greatest monster heels ever in the business. The guy could move, could work, and he had these off-the-chart interviews. Today we see they try to script promos for a monster. Joe LeDuc was just being himself. He was just unbelievably raw talent. And Lance, I know you have a very special memory of Joe LeDuc. Probably the most memorable moment in studio wrestling history when Joe LeDuc made an oak. Well, it was supposed to be an oath, but he called it an oak, I believe. But can you tell us about that moment?
It wasn't a tobacco juice oath either. It was a blood oath. And this, we're really serious. And Jerry, of course, was extremely serious because it affected whether we stayed on the station or not. And there was a real restriction and a real desire to keep it somewhat family-oriented and not have a lot of blood. Joe LeDuc comes out there on one Saturday, and you wonder, was it real? Let me tell you one thing. It was so real. I had a heart attack. Jerry had one a little later. But he gets up there on television. He's got this double-edged axe, and he's standing there talking about Jerry Lawler. I take a blood oath. And he takes that axe and goes across his arm, and I'm standing there next to him looking at him, and all of a sudden, here comes this red stuff. Pouring down his arm. He cut his arm, bang, right wide open in there. I could not believe that he did. Joe, you can't do that on television. Oh, yeah?
I remember that moment, too. I would move out of camera range because I thought it always looked dumb for me to be standing behind, just doing this or looking around while Lance was doing the interview. So I was standing off to the side. I couldn't believe what was going on. And by the way, you talk about the family atmosphere we tried to keep, and we pretty well did that. And I think that's one reason the show had such longevity, too. I think that's one mistake that was made years ago, maybe out of necessity. But our whole family, the bank president and his son, could watch that every Saturday. So it was scary when we saw him take that axe and cut his arm, and we knew it was a shoot. And I, of course, remember that moment very vividly. But the other thing I'll say about Joe LeDuc is he was such a nice man. And for years after that, after he was not wrestling in Memphis regularly often, just every now and then I'd get a little note from Joe LeDuc, wherever he was, or Merry Christmas or something like that. And I always thought that was very special of a man who was traveling as much and to remember the people that he had worked with in the past.
Yes, Joe was a very good wrestler, an incredibly tough guy. But what I remember most about him was what Dave said. He was a prince of a fellow. You know, as you go back over the hundreds of people that walk through in your life, you have a few of them, and really decent people. Joe LeDuc was one of them.
In 1978, you stopped booking the NWA World Champion and started booking AWA World Champion Nick Bockwinkel. And to me, you know, slowly in Memphis we kind of forgot about the NWA title because Nick carried himself like a true champion. He had the small little white towel that he would bring to the ring, and he looked so regal. He would, you know, you almost had to have a dictionary in hand when you were watching a Nick Bockwinkel promo, maybe especially in Memphis. What made Bockwinkel such a great champion and such a great draw for you?
Well, not only was he a great wrestler, but he was an articulate, intelligent, decent man. And I just, you know, I really cared. I counted myself lucky that I knew Nick Bockwinkel. And the politics of it, the NWA was beginning to slide, I guess is a good word for it. Also, I was not successful in the politics of getting Lawler a run at the title. And I had much better luck talking to Vern Gagne. So that played a big part in it. But also, Vern had the Road Warriors, Bockwinkel. He had some really stellar talent that would help us draw money. And that's the bottom line.
Okay. The following year, in 1979, Lawler was a babyface. Bockwinkel was coming back into town, and I guess to stress the importance of the world title, Bill Dundee had gotten a title shot and had come really close to beating Nick and taking the belt. So they scheduled a rematch, and of course, Lawler got jealous and turned heel, and he also got a new manager by the name of Jimmy Hart. Lance and Dave especially, can you tell us what it was like? First of all, I don't know how you kept a straight face. But, of course, initially when Jimmy turned heel, or Jimmy was with Lawler when Lawler turned heel, he didn't get to talk too much. It was only after Lawler broke his leg that he got to run with it.
Remember the good old days when he didn't talk too much? I don't know.
What are your early memories of Jimmy Hart working with him?
You just heard him. Jimbo was something. He had this 24-hour energy that was unreal when you were around him, because he was really had a very good mind. I'll tell you, it was hard to gather that sometime with some of the outfits that Jimmy wears, but he knew the business very, very well. And Jimmy was a fun kind of a guy who never lost his passion. Although he would mumble and groan and this and that, he was the kind of a guy that was good to have around your guys that were working for Jerry, because he kept them pumped, and he would bring some down-to-earth, common-sense enthusiasm to it. And so he had a lot of that. Dave?
Well, I of course, had been a rock and roll DJ back in the 60s, so I knew Jimmy as a member of the Gentrys when Keep On Dancing was a big #1 hit in the country, and Jimmy was not the lead singer. He was singing backup. And then when the lead singer, Larry Raspberry, left the group, Jimmy took it over, and he had some regional hits himself. So I'd known Jimmy for quite a while there. And when he came in with wrestling, you're right, we didn't really build a Jimmy Hart as the personality until Lawler broke his leg playing football. And the reason for that was we knew that Lawler was going to be out for weeks and weeks and weeks. And Lawler is the money. Lawler's the draw. So, again, this genius over here comes up with this idea that Jimmy Hart comes out the next week. And it wasn't his friend Jerry Lawler who got his leg broken playing football. It was, I broke his leg. I'm the one that broke his leg. And so he turns this whole heel thing, and that ran for weeks, and it was a great bridge until we could get Jerry back. And of course, when he came back, well, there was a program that was ready built for us. But Jimmy, my take on Jimmy is that he had all of his blood removed back around 1980, and they replaced it with Red Bull.
Yeah. Jimmy literally saved the Memphis territory. I had cautioned Jerry, begged him, quit playing this brand of touch football, which wasn't touch football. It was really tackle football without pads. I said, you're going to get hurt, and this whole territory is built around you. Well, he didn't listen, and he broke his leg. I got Jimmy, and I got on the phone and talked Paul Ellering into coming in, and we were in Louisville in the Kentucky Derby, and so we're up there in a hotel room in Louisville discussing the TV next Saturday. And he said, what do I say about Lawler? And I, just off the top of my head, I said, well, we're up here. What if you have a horse and he's running in the Kentucky Derby and he breaks his leg? What do you do with the horse? And I said, give it a pause so that it sinks in and say, well, Lance, you shoot him. Lawler was watching and took great offense to the disrespect and got mad. And, Jimmy thinks he broke his jaw in Evansville when he came back. I don't think so. Yeah. Well, anyway, but Jimmy Hart went from being just a side man to being the center of attention, what we built all the programs around. Paul Ellering did a great job, but Jimmy was the box office that replaced Lawler and kept Memphis drawing until he came back.
You brought in Tommy Rich at one point, the hottest baby face in the country, and turned him heel. Dundee picked up the slack, and you also immediately, Jimmy Valiant was in the territory as a heel, and you could always count on Handsome Jimmy to pick up the slack when Lawler was away. You immediately turned Jimmy Valiant babyface, and off you were running. 1980 was a strong year for you.
Yes.
And you had this great anticipation all year long with the heat bubbling between Lawler and Hart. And Lawler with his broken leg, and sometimes he would come to ringside, but he could never get his hands on Jimmy Hart. And it culminated the last week in December. I was there. I think I was 8 years old, not 8 or 9 years old. Sellout crowd. People were sitting in the aisles. They literally broke the doors down. The cops had to come. People were breaking in, trying to get in to see Lawler battle the Dream Machine Troy Graham so we could get 5 minutes with Jimmy Hart. And then in 1981, you were off to the races. And you had Hart brought in Jack Briscoe as a heel. All these great guys, Dory Funk Jr. trying to re-break Lawler's leg. Can you tell us about 1981, 1982, the Lawler-Hart feud?
It was a natural again. I forget what the term they use today, work shoots, but that's what we always did in Memphis. We tried to follow what was in front of us, the reality. And the reality was that Lawler really felt like Jimmy Hart had let him down by saying, what do you do with the horse in the Kentucky Derby? It breaks his leg, you shoot him. He really took offense to that. So Jimmy was gun shy of Lawler, and it came across as real. So everything that we did had a tension and a sense of realism about it.
I think, in hindsight, of course, we had no way of knowing it at the time, that the Jimmy Hart, Jerry Lawler program eventually set up the Andy Kaufman program.
Well, you know what? And that's why don't we get into that now, since Dave brought it up? I know a little bit about what happened. I believe Andy Kaufman he'd been wrestling women as part of his comedy act. And I believe he contacted Vince McMahon, Vern Gagne, maybe even the Crockett's, about wrestling women from the audience. Nobody would let him do it. Bill After heard about it, called Lawler and told him about it, and you guys talked about it, and immediately said, hell yes, bring him to Memphis. And, and it's almost, it almost worked out beautifully, because had he gone to New York and said, I'm from Hollywood, I don't think it would have resonated quite like it did being in Memphis, Tennessee, and talking down to all these rednecks and hillbillies and doing the hygiene tips. It worked out beautifully for him to have this aura of the Hollywood star.
Andy was a prince of a guy. My only concern with it before I got to know Andy was that naturally wrestling to me was very serious. And I didn't want him to make it too much comedy as far as in the ring. The matches he had with all the women were shoots, absolute shoots. They were not scripted, planned, nothing. Andy convinced me in the first phone conversation with his knowledge of wrestling that he was an ardent fan and would never do anything to make light or make fun of the business. He loved the business. I can guarantee you it cost him a whole lot more money to wrestle than he made. But Lawler literally slapped him backwards on the Letterman show. I mean, it was, and you know who told him to do that? Andy Kaufman. He said, I don't care what the consequences is. I want it to be real. And Lawler decked him.
He did. Also in 1982, that was in April 1982 when the whole Lawler-Kaufman feud unfolded. And around that same time, you guys introduced one of the hottest gimmicks to ever come across the Memphis territory, the fabulous ones, Stan Lane and Steve Kern. Can you tell us a little bit about how you put that program together? And also, Lance and Dave, get your memories of the Fabs, who were just a huge drawing card. The girls not only went crazy for him, but all my guy friends, we thought they were the coolest guys in the world. And also the first Fabulous Ones video, which kind of set a precedent for all the rock and roll tag teams to follow.
Yeah. It was very simple. Business was, it's always up and down, but business was a little slow, and I was sitting in my office wishing that Jackie Fargo was 20 years younger. And I made the comment to somebody, I think maybe it was Dutch Mantell, but I made the comment, I said, if I could clone Fargo, we could pop this and get back to a sellout. And he said, well, why don't you? And, you know, it's funny how little simple things like that, that gave us the seed for the Fabulous Ones. I called Jackie and asked him if he would endorse them. And, of course, he did. Jackie loved the business and did everything he could to help us draw money when he wasn't wrestling. And back in those days, we didn't have to worry about ASCAP or BMI, and there was a ZZ Top song called Sharp Dressed Man. And, of course, we put sequins on the Fabs because Jackie wore sequins and made the video Sharp Dressed Man, and I think that video, probably as much as anything, got them over.
Yep. Lance and Dave, what are your memories of the Fab, Stan and Steve?
They were the perfect combination at the time. They just did a marvelous job, and I liked all of the videos in the pieces of where they were on the motorcycles and the cars and that kind of stuff. I think it's funny how things like that generate an enthusiasm and loyalty among the people, and they wanted to see them. That's all there was to it.
It was a great piece of marketing, as Jerry said. The video, I think, sold the whole thing right from the get-go, and then they were able to maintain it. They were a couple of guys who had been talented anyway in their own right, and putting them together and putting that persona on them, and them being able to pull it off, I think was the key to the whole thing. But it did broaden the appeal of the show, and of course the television show was the key to whether you sold out that Monday night or not. And I think the viewership of young women probably was higher once, especially the second week that they were on the television show. So if you can broaden your appeal and it's okay for mom, dad, maybe not mom so much, but dad and all the kids, then it's easier to justify taking them to Mid-South Coliseum on Monday night. And I think Stan and Steve contributed to that a great deal.
And I think, too, the Fabs were a great example of just how innovative the Memphis show was and the influence that they had on other promotions, because quickly, World Class is doing music videos. Vern Gagne contacted you wanting to know how to shoot music videos. Mid-South put tuxedo jackets on Tommy Rogers and Bobby Fulton, called them the Fantastics, and did a shot-for-shot copy of your Sharp Dressed Man video. Joel Watts did that. Another thing, too, that the Memphis area influence was a great brawling style that came in vogue in the early 90s with ECW, and that can maybe be traced to the 1979 Tupelo, Mississippi, actually, was it 79 or 78, Tupelo, Mississippi concession stand brawl, where Lawler, Dundee, Larry Latham, and Wayne Ferris just literally, they tore the concession stand apart and had this bloody brawl. What was the inspiration for that?
Well, it was just that we said let's carry it to the next level and make it a wild match. And we've got a natural set here, the concession stand, and it makes sense if you're in a fight in a concession stand, you'd throw a bottle of mustard against the wall. But I'll tell you what is unique about things. I'm in the dressing room and I'm laying out some ideas. But here is what made that a classic. And if you have access to it, go back and look. Lance was upstairs doing the audio. And when the thing broke out, Lance, there's some narrow steps, and he is talking and saying to Randy West, I guess it was, be careful. Watch them. They're don't let them hit the camera. And almost this behind the scene. I'm sorry. Hello. All right. Lance is talking in a reality mode. Don't let them break the camera. Stay out of the way. They're crazy guys. Stay back up here on the steps, Randy. And by the way, the camera went black, so all you hear is Lance's audio. And boy, when that was over, and I looked back at the tape, I said, "We got it."
I tell you, you wonder, was that concession stand brawl real? Let me tell you how real I thought it was. And this was an incident that actually happened. Larry Latham almost lost his head, literally that night, because Lawler picks up a gallon jar of mustard. Now, you got to see where we're broadcasting up above. Down below is a concession stand. And so that's why we had to run down the steps to see what was happening, what these crazy guys were doing. And I get down there, and I see Lawler grab this gallon jar of mustard, and he fogged this thing at Larry Latham. And if it had hit him, I'm telling you, that far over, it would have taken his head right off. That mustard hit that wall, boom, glass going everywhere, coming running down, and you tell me it wasn't real? Woo!
And Lance, I remember you saying, "Whoa, there's mustard all over us. I hope it didn't get in the camera."
Well, it was an exciting time, Jerry. I loved it. I'm telling you that, in a sense.
It was an incredible piece of video. I wasn't there. I was in the safety of Action News 5 in Memphis, Tennessee when it occurred. But what a great piece of video. Probably one of the most watched pieces of video over the years.
And Lance, as you're trying to get down the steps, we're talking about referring to what Jerry was talking about. The cord is stuck, and you're going, damn it! I can't get the cord.
I apologize.
We got a hell of a fight going on down here. Come on.
Yeah, and I'm sure that I'm assuming that Lance would think that we're going to cut that video and just pick it up with the action. But when I look back, Lance was the reality of the whole piece. Not to say those guys didn't bust their butt, but
it was real to me, believe me.
Talking about raw footage, I have to bring up the empty arena match between Terry Funk and Jerry Lawler. And again, Jerry, going back to what you were saying with the Tupelo brawl, to me, that footage was so classic because you had Lance there, and Lance is going, he's actually having a conversation with the cameraman going, I don't know if this crazy thing's going to come off or not. I don't know what we're doing here. And then you light up a cigarette. So you're just kind of smoking there, and they're like, I don't know. Oh, you want to go? Okay. Well, let's just see if it comes up. I'll do an intro, and if they show up, you put out the cigarette, and that all aired on TV, which to me, it was just one of those little things, but it actually made it seem like we didn't know what the hell was going on. We didn't know if this thing was actually going to come off or not. And then Terry Funk shows up and just cursing like a sailor, make a sailor blush. What are your memories of that day?
Memories of that day?
Yeah.
I thought, who in the world ever thought of this idea of doing this? It's the dumbest thing I ever heard about.
It had to be Terry's idea.
Why'd you think about that, Jerry?
no, that was Terry Funk's genius. Let me tell you a story about Terry real quick, and it will let you know how he would come up with an empty arena. The best night out of the 365 days of the year back in the territory days of wrestling is Thanksgiving. Everybody eats a big Thanksgiving dinner, and then they lay around the house, and then they want to get out and do something, so they like to go to the wrestling match. I'm sitting in my office, and Terry Funk calls, and he says, Jarrett, I've got an idea that's going to make us both rich. And I said, really? What is that? And he says, wrestling promoters are stupid sons of bitches. I said, excuse me? He said, well, not you, and not me, but most of them are stupid. And he says, nobody thinks about Thanksgiving night until a week or 2 weeks before the matches. Let's you and I go around, and I'll put in half and you put in half, and we'll put a deposit on every arena in the country that's a major arena. And then we'll sell it back to the promoters. I said, Terry, first of all, there are probably 300 arenas that we would have to cover. And then I don't think the promoters are that stupid. I would just go to a different arena. And then we're going to be stuck with 300 empty arenas and broke. And he said, oh, no, I promise you, they will buy it from us. I said, well, do you think they'll buy it from us before or after they shoot us? And I said, no, thank you, Terry. But that's how Terry's, and he was dead serious. That's how his mind works. So you can see from that situation how he would pick up the phone and say, let's have a match in the empty Mid-South Coliseum. He was he was one of a kind.
And that footage closed with like this unbelievable footage of blood going down Terry's eye and him screaming, my eye, Lance, call me an ambulance, my eye. And Lance is like, oh, okay, I'm going to call it. We got to get out of here. And Lance runs off, and the cameraman stays on Terry, and he's just shrieking until the ambulance comes, I guess. In 1984, Stan and Steve left the area. You created a new set of fabulous ones, Tommy Rich and Eddie Gilbert. And, you were smart enough to realize that there was a chance that the fans were going to reject them. They were not going to accept them, especially, they came out wearing the same tights as Stan and Steve, the jackets, the bow ties, and it didn't work. And you always left yourself a backup plan that you were going to turn Eddie Gilbert heel. Eddie had grown up like a lot of Memphians wanting to be Jerry Lawler, and actually could imitate him to a T with the smirk and you could tell later on when Eddie became a hot star, the Jerry Lawler influence. Can you tell us a little bit about Eddie Gilbert and what you saw in him and what led to that big push as a heel in 1984?
Eddie was a second-generation wrestler. His father was Tommy, and I've known Eddie since he was a baby, literally a baby. And he would write out, he would book cards, and I'm talking about when he was 12 years old, and he would come to Memphis or Nashville or Louisville. He'd ride with his dad, and he'd come up to me and say, I don't mean I think you ought to do this, but would you look at it and tell me if it's crazy? And so, this kid had this passion for the business, not just as a wrestler. And he came to me and he said, I'm not very big. Do you think I could be a wrestler? And I said, I think you could. I'm not very big either. And I said, but you're going to have to be better than the average. And, of course, he turned out to be better than the average. Eddie, somebody asked me if Eddie hadn't have died, where he would be. And there's a very good chance that he would be booking for somebody and be very successful, because he was really brilliant. He was smart. He studied the business. I'm amazed at Scott here and how he has this command of wrestling and wrestling history. And Eddie was that way too. Eddie knew, this program, that program, who wrestled, who, when, and how the fans reacted. So Eddie was a special kid.
And Eddie was actually instrumental. He was the one who actually turned me heel. I was refereeing, and my girlfriend happened to be in the audience, and actually my good friend Scott Arthur, who's here, and some friends of mine from high school. And Eddie, he and I would always talk to him about finishes. I always had a good finish for him. And it got to the point where slowly, guys like Moondog Spot were actually listening to my finishes. And Eddie Gilbert noticed this. And we were talking one night, and I said, hey, my girlfriend's here, my buddies are here. Is there any way you can involve me in the finish some way? Can you throw a fireball at Lawler and have him duck and it hits me and there's a big schmoz to end it? And he's like, let me think about it. And then Lawler calls me in the dressing room, and he goes, okay, Scott, we're going to turn you heel. And I look over at Eddie, and Eddie's in the corner going like that. So I miss Eddie, and I'm glad I got to work with him at all. In 1985, Eddie Gilbert lost a loser leave town match. He didn't have to leave, but Jimmy Hart left. He had already made a deal with Vince McMahon. And again, talking about one of those classic Memphis moments, in his last appearance, he went out in style. He was the one taking the powder, but he gave Lance Russell a powder. He dumped a bag of flour over your head. Did you know that was going to happen?
Now, I'm going to tell you what it was really. You got to understand that we caught one of those rare Memphis ice storms, and nobody was able to get into the station. And Jimmy was there, and a few others, and that's about it. And we ended up, Jimmy was kind of running the show that day, and he came up with this idea about with that sack of flour. And Jerry has always been kind from the very beginning of it. And when they said, oh, let me punch Lance right in the mouth or something like that, and Jerry said, no, we got to take care of our talent, and let's not be beaten up on the guy out there that's got the mic in his hand. And so this was Jimmy Hart's opportunity, and he came up with this idea of getting that bag of flour. And, of course, he pounds it down on it. Well, I mean, it was flour everywhere. And if you've never had it done to you, you will not be able to understand what I'm telling you. My mind went completely crazy. We had to let's take a break. You better believe it. And I went in the dressing room in there, and the first thing I'm going to do is get some water and get it all off. No way, man. You know what happened. And so from then on, it turned worse, and everybody else got a huge charge on it.
Yeah, I remember thinking, holy cheese, I'm going to have to do the rest of the show by myself because Lance has turned into a biscuit all of a sudden here. But was it that day or was it another day that he came back later on that you went. We were about a block and a half from one of the big grocery stores in Memphis, Cecil's Supermarket, and you at some point threw the mic down and said, "I'll fix this. I'm going to take care of it." Maybe he was back threatening you again a couple of weeks, couple of months later. So Lance goes down to Cecil's and buys him a sack full of flour and returned the favor.
I'd forgotten that part.
I mentioned, of course, Vince McMahon, and of course in 1984 and 1985, he was slowly cherry-picking all the top stars from a lot of the territories, and a lot of them quickly started going downhill. Jerry, I don't know if you were smarter than most, but you were definitely more creative than a lot of the guys out there. So immediately in 1985, when you lost Hart, so you turned Randy Savage, who was a babyface for you at that point, you turned him back heel, and off you go. You have this another great run in 1985 when all the other territories are struggling. But can we go back to 1980 real quick, when Randy Savage and his father Angelo, I remember it was the strangest thing. Memphis Wrestling was all I knew, and suddenly on this independent station, I think it was Channel 24 WPTY, suddenly this theme from Midnight Express is playing, and the ICW program starts. And these guys, these crazy guys, Randy Macho Man Savage, Ronnie Garvin, Bob Root, Bob Orton Jr., all NWA Outcast. They have this crazy wrestling show. It was actually pretty well done. It was in the same vein maybe as Memphis Wrestling. But all their promos, they were running down the Memphis guys. It was a very unusual situation, and challenging the Memphis guys to street fights. And I was very confused as a young man as to exactly, were they affiliated with Memphis Wrestling? What was the deal? Can you tell us a little bit about that promotional war?
Yeah, one of the fondest memories I have is that period of time. I'm sure a lot of you know Sputnik Monroe. Well, Randy and his father, Angelo and Lanny, they were going to run opposition to us and open up. And they made the mistake, as Scott alluded to, of making promos for our talent. So we're sitting in the Memphis dressing room, and somebody said, "Jerry, can you explain to me, Randy and particularly Angelo, they know the wrestling business. That's all we do is knock each other and challenge each other and say we're cowards. Why are they spending all of their interview time plugging us instead of their own matches?" And I said, "Well, fellas, I can't answer that. I don't know how stupid people think." And Sputnik Monroe jumps up and says, "By God, I'll tell you how stupid people think." And that has been one of the classic stories in the wrestling business, and it really happened. So anytime anybody says something about how to stupid act, you say, "Go get Sputnik, he knows." But at any rate, they didn't know that. But after they folded, I picked up the phone and I called Randy Savage. And I said, "Randy, you have plugged a match against Lawler and Dundee for a year. I don't know if you were really angry or just what it was, but why don't we make some money out of it?" And Randy said, and it was kind of emotional because he said, "After all that I've tried to do to put you out of business, you're calling me to give me a job?" And I said, "Yeah, I'll take your whole family. We'll do this thing where y'all show up at Memphis TV and carry right on with your challenge, and we can pretend it's a shoot until we have the match." And so he came in, and a lot of people went to Vince McMahon when he called him. And I told all of my talent, I said, "I can't blame any of you that go to Vince. That's the big time, and you're going to make a lot of money. All I ask you to do is let me know, and so that we can work you out and have as little impact as possible." Some did that, a few. Most did not. But Randy Savage told Vince McMahon, and the reason I know this is Vince McMahon told me. Randy Savage told him, he said, I really want to go and I'd like to have a chance to make the big money. But my honor is more important. I have to give Jerry a 2 or 3 week notice. And he did. And that is one quality guy. And I'll never forget that.
And it gave you guys time to build up a loser leave town match with Lawler and Savage. Popped out, I think it was like 9,000 people that night.
Yes.
It was a tremendous match. Lawler's bleeding. They almost stopped the match and had Lawler declared the loser, and Lawler rallied, begged him not to stop it, won Randy Savage. In the fans' eyes, sent Randy Savage packing.
Yes,
Yep.
yes. But Randy was a quality class human being. And he and I are friends to this day.
Yeah, I didn't know what to expect from Randy because my first real encounter with Randy was in Lexington, Kentucky. I had taken a night off to ride up to Rupp Arena with Lance and Audrey, his wife, and my wife Margaret went with us to do the matches at Rupp Arena, which was incredible. What a night! But as soon as we get there, we start to get out, and these guys start yelling at us. And Lance says, "That's Randy Poffo." Okay.
Hey, who could miss it? We opened the door to walk out, and my feet hit the concrete in the parking lot behind Rupp Arena. You know where we're all parked back there. We get out there, and I hear this, Rasta! That raspy voice, Whoa! It's finally caught up with me.
What had happened?
That was Randy.
What had happened? We had gotten their TV slot in Lexington. Lance had secured that for us. So Randy was real unhappy with Lance. I thought he was unhappy with all of us, and I guess he was. So I remember thinking, we're going to die right here on this parking lot at Rupp Arena. And we haven't even gotten to see the wrestling match or a Kentucky basketball game. And so what they ended up doing was security. Lance drove the van actually into Rupp Arena, and we parked in part of that underground facility there. But I didn't know what to expect from Randy Savage when heard he was coming in. So I was legitimately a little uneasy sitting there. I didn't know but what he was a loose cannon and would go off and extract some revenge for putting his family out of their promotion out of business. And I'm sitting there with a wife and 3 little kids and didn't want to die either in Rupp Arena or on a Saturday morning television show. And so I was a bit uneasy until we got to know Randy a little bit better. But what a great performer he was and is.
You remember also the end of that night when the match is over with, and all of them, everybody's sitting there waiting because Randy and his gang, they were talking about, they'd already arrested a couple of the guys that were with Randy and had them in jail. And they were threatening at any minute to go up in the ring, jump and all that. And the police told them, boy, you make one wrong breath and you're dead. And so everybody was nervous. And this is an actual fact. We finished the night of action there, and everybody's saying, whoa, boy, let's get out of here. And we walked back in the dressing room in there, and I swear that it seemed to me, Jerry, I know you didn't know this happened, but it seemed to me that everybody in that place, every wrestler, every living soul that came out of Memphis down there with us had a piece, but Dave and I. And we're here clicking and checking. Are you kidding me? What is this? I mean, who wrote this? And we get back in there, and we were going across a Bluegrass Parkway. This is getting a little too much detail, but I'm telling you, we were going across a Bluegrass Parkway back to 65 to come down to Nashville in there, and said, well, you got to be careful. We're going over there. They said they're going to jump us out there on the Bluegrass Parkway. Hey, and who stands up? I don't know how many of you all ever had the opportunity to see him, but who stands up but Sonny King and says, let me lead the way. And Big Sonny, boy, I'm telling you what, in the ring, tough. Out of the ring, tougher. He was something. And we all held our breath going across that Bluegrass Parkway, waiting at one of the stands, when the pace places you go through, for somebody to jump out and get us. Needless to say, we made it through alive. No, Dave got killed up there. That's right.
Guys, we got to wrap things up, unfortunately. But Lance, I want to ask you really quick, because you were there that night, and I was there in about the third row taking pictures. I was about 15 years old. The Lawler head shaving, when Austin Idol and Tommy Rich conspired with Paulie Dangerly at that point to shave the head of Jerry Lawler. The people were literally climbing the cage to get in, and the police were having to scale the cage to get in there as well. That had to be a nervous moment for you. I was looking around. I really thought there was going to be a riot.
It was a spectacular thing, and I'll make it real quick to tell you, just simply to say that. And it was what a great idea, Jerry, that was that night. And here's Tommy with provisions underneath the ring for the whole night.
Yeah, a case of beer,
Yeah, or a
six-pack.
case. Yeah, I guess it was a case, probably.
Are you kidding me? Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, can we hear it for our Memphis legends, Lance Russell, Dave Brown, and Jerry Jarrett?
Thank you.
And personally, I just want to say thank you to all three of you for being such a staple of my childhood and giving me a lot of special memories. And I just want you to know, I don't even know if I got a chance to tell you in the 90s, it was such an honor for me to stand alongside you guys and antagonize you and bug the hell out of you, just like Jimmy Hart did so many years ago. It was a dream come true for me, and I thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Scott.
You turned out not too bad for a smart aleck punk.
Let's give it up for Scott Bowden, our host.